Hello dear viewer, welcome to our lesson of Primary 5. My name is John Kokas Moding, and today we are going to have a new topic that we are beginning, that is topic 3 of our Primary 5 syllabus. It's about the climate of Uganda. In the previous topic, we finished looking at the physical features, and I believe you watched those videos. In this one, we are going to be discussing a lot of issues, and first we need to begin by understanding the meaning of what we call climate. So, when we are beginning this topic, the first thing we are going to note is for us to give the meaning of the term climate. In our books, we are going to be following our workbooks, and we get this topic, this lesson, that is from page 61. That is where we get this one from, which means that is where I want you also to turn into, like in case you have a booklet right there with you. So climate is defined as the average weather condition, the average weather condition of a place recorded for a long time. That is how we can simply define climate. Climate is the average. There are keywords that we need to be understanding in this lesson. The average weather condition of a place recorded for a long time, or we can say recorded for a long period. That is what we mean by climate. We also need to note that climate has got an attachment with weather, which means we also need to remind ourselves that when we were in primary 3 down there, we learned about weather. Now, how did we define weather? We said weather is the daily condition of the atmosphere, or we say it's the state of the atmosphere at a given time. The state of the atmosphere. The state of the atmosphere at a given time. Meaning this one is observed within a short time or within a short period. So we have got the difference, like if a question is asking us, what is the difference between climate, that is climate, and weather? We should be able to tell that climate is recorded for a long time, while weather is recorded for a short time. That is one thing we need to note. The difference, the similarity is that both are observed and they are recorded. But the difference is climate is recorded for a long period, whereas weather is the state of the atmosphere at a given time. Now, for that we shall also need to go back to that lesson that we learned about in weather. We said in weather we have got what we call, we have the elements of weather. We have the elements of weather. But before we go to that, there are some terms that I want us to first bring. That is when we are looking at climate. We have terms. Number 1, we have already understood climate. The other second term, we have what we call climatology. Before we come back to these elements, we have climatology. This simply means the study of climate. Is the study of climate. That is how it is defined. Now, we also need to note that the people who do this, who study, who record these weather conditions, are the ones that we call climatologists. So that is another term for us to note. Climatology, now we have climatologists. So these are now the people who record or who study about climate. You can say who record the climatic changes. That is climatologists. Then we also have, still in line with this, we have what we call meteorology. This, I'm sure we learned about this in primary 4. Meteorology. We need to take serious note of the spelling. Meteorology simply means the study of weather. So we can simply say meteorology is the study of weather. Or we can say the study of weather changes. Now, still we need to note, the other side we say the study of climate is called climatology. The people, climatologists. Here we are now having meteorology. The people, meteorologists. So we are going to have meteorologists. Still we shall be saying, these are the people who study about weather, or who record the weather changes, who study about weather changes. That is for meteorologists. Then the other one is, we have what we call weather forecasting. Weather forecasting. Now, weather forecasting, we are looking at telling the future weather. To forecast means you predict what is to happen ahead. So here we simply say weather forecasting is the telling of the future weather. It's the telling of the future weather. If we can also write the word prediction, predicting, we can as well bring it here. We can say weather forecasting is the prediction of the future weather, which still means to tell or to foretell, to tell or to mention what will happen. That's what they call to predict. So we can simply use the word telling so that we don't make mistakes as in spellings. So we are saying weather forecasting is the telling of the future weather. Now, this is very good. Weather forecasting is very good to a farmer in that it enables a farmer to plan ahead. Like if a farmer knows when the rains come or when it begins to rain. So you'll find that weather forecasting enables that farmer to plan for his farm activities. It enables him to avail himself with the planting materials, to get the tools, to get the land ready, because now the farmer will be knowing when it will begin to rain. So those are the advantages of weather forecasting in case we are asked. We go back to our lesson. We say climate has an attachment to weather, which means we also need to remind ourselves on the elements of weather that we learned already. Elements of weather. I want to bring the difference because sometimes these things confuse us when we are in class or when we are writing our exams. We have elements of weather, then we have got the types. These types, we also call them conditions. Conditions of weather. So we need to note the difference. Now, can we identify them? Which are the elements of weather? The elements include rainfall. When it is the time or when it's the condition, we say it is rainy. So we can have it as rainy weather. That is now the condition. Here we shall be having sunshine. Sunshine. If it comes to the type or condition, we shall say it is sunny. So for that, we shall get sunny weather. I believe we are understanding. We have cloud cover. Cloud cover. Here, when it comes to the condition or the type, we shall say it is cloudy, forming what we call cloudy weather. We have fog, which when it comes to the condition, we shall be saying foggy weather. Simple as that. Then we have, which other one have we said? We have wind movement. Wind movement. Coming to this, we shall be saying the weather is windy. So we shall say windy weather. So we need to identify the difference between the elements and the conditions or the types. We have others like temperature. Now when it comes to temperature, we say the weather is hot, the weather is cold. So that one comes here, hot weather, cold weather. Then we have also air pressure. And then we have humidity also, can add it here. Humidity. Which when if we were to look at it as a condition, we would call this humid weather. Humid weather. And others. So that is the difference between the elements of weather and the types of weather. When we go to this weather elements, of course we need to remember that these elements are recorded using their respective instruments. For example, allow me to go through the instruments which are on that table that is on page 62, because there is a correction that we need to adjust in case you have your booklet. We have one side having the examples of, the elements of weather, these are the aspects of weather, and then the other side of the table gives us the instruments that are used. On the side of wind, we are saying wind is measured using very many instruments. We group them as wind instruments. Those are the ones for wind. It gives us the instrument, the element of weather. And then this side we have the instrument. And we say the first given to us, the first element is wind, which I say we have what we call the wind instrument, which means we are looking at very many instruments, a group of instruments that are used to record wind. For example, we have a wind vane, that is one. Another one, we have what we call the windsock, also deals with wind. Then we have the windcock, also deals with wind. We have the anemometer. Anemometer also deals with wind. So at the end of it all, we shall understand that these instruments form what we call wind instruments. Reason being, they deal with wind. For example, we have a wind vane, a windcock. These ones are for the direction of wind. We have the windsock that is always placed at the airports for showing the direction of wind to the pilots. And then we have the anemometer, which is to measure the speed of wind. So we need also to be aware of that. Then we have the second element, that is rainfall, given to us on our list, on our table. Rainfall is measured using the instrument that we call rain gauge. And we write rain gauge as one word, rain gauge. That is the instrument that is used to measure the rainfall. So that is for rainfall. Then we go to the next one. It gives us humidity. That is measured using the instrument we call the hygrometer. Humidity, the amount of water vapor in the atmosphere, measured using a hygrometer. I am sure we learned about these instruments, we drew them. Then we have air pressure or atmospheric pressure. Air pressure, that we can also call atmospheric pressure, which is measured using the instrument called a barometer. That is for air pressure. Next one is temperature, which is an element of weather. Temperature is measured using the instrument that we call the thermometer. Thermometer. We need to be very specific. We can't simply say thermometer because here we are looking at a weather station. We are looking at meteorology. And when we are talking of that, we need to be specific. Which thermometer? The thermometer. This is the one we call minimum and maximum thermometer. But if you just write there, thermometer, someone will cross you. Because we also have the other thermometers which are used in clinics, used in hospitals. So you need to be specific that here we are looking at meteorology, weather issues. So the thermometer there is that sixth thermometer. And then we have also sunshine. Sunshine as an element which we are saying it's measured using a Campbell, that we also call the sunshine recorder. Sunshine recorder. And then the last one is the one which gives us the ceilometer, that is the clouds measured using the ceilometer. This is where I said we need to change the R here. The computer printed, enter the R instead of L. It's supposed to be L, so make that correction. That is on page 62, on the last element of weather. The instrument is supposed to be a ceilometer. So that is what we can have as for weather. Let's get back to climate. So we are looking at what we call the aspects of climate. We have two aspects of climate, and I want you to get me very clear. We have got two aspects of climate. One, we have rainfall, and then temperature. Rainfall and temperature. Those are the two aspects that determine climate. Which means we also need to note that in the two, one of them overtakes the other. Which one is that? Rainfall. Because temperature is under rainfall. And it is rainfall that determines most of the activities that people are to carry out in an area. It is that very aspect that determines people's settlement in an area. I mean, if people are looking for an area to settle, of course no one would wish to go and settle in an area which does not receive rain. People want areas which receive rain because it enables to make the place cool, making the environment conducive for human settlement. Leave alone that, when an area receives rain, people can be able to carry out other economic activities. For example, crop growing. So we need to note that it is rainfall that determines human settlement. It's rainfall that determines the economic activities which are to be done in an area. So that is about rainfall. You can be given that question. which aspect of climate determines settlement, which aspect of climate determines the human activities that are done in an area, that is rainfall. I believe we have understood that. Next, we need to note that we have what we call types. Leave alone the types of weather, but now we are coming to types of climate. Types of climate. These types of climate, we can also call them climatic regions. Climatic regions. Or we can also call them climatic zones. We need to be aware of all these words that can be used in our question papers. We can call them types of climate, climatic regions, or we are calling them climatic zones. So we need to be aware. So which are these types of climate? One, we have what we call equatorial climate. Equatorial climate. We shall have what we call tropical climate. Tropical climate. And then we shall also look at the climate which is experienced in areas which are near mountains. We call it mountain or montane. Two ways. We can call it mountain climate, or we say montane climate. The one which becomes simpler to you, is the one you will use. Either you can say, let me just write mountain climate. Or you say, let me write montane climate. Both versions are correct. Then we have the other type of climate that we call semi-desert. Semi-desert climate. Semi-desert climate. So these are mainly the types of climate that are experienced in Uganda. That is, we have equatorial climate, we have tropical climate, mountain climate, and then we have semi-desert climate. Semi-desert climate meaning that this is the type of climate which is experienced in semi-desert areas in Uganda. And when we talk of semi-desert areas, we should be able to note that the semi-desert areas are in, that is the northeastern part of Uganda, that is Karamoja sub-region. That's where we experience this. Then, like I have said, mountain climate experienced in those areas which are having mountains. Remember, we learned right away from down classes that mountains help to form rain, which will make the climate of an area suitable for settlement. And then we have the tropical climate, which is experienced around the tropics, and this is the one which covers most parts of Uganda. We shall be looking at this. And the first one was giving us what we call the equatorial climate. That is the type of climate which is experienced in areas along the equator. Now, we have what we call descriptions. How do we describe this type of climate or these types of climate? We have the first one, that is equatorial climate, and if we were to look at this one by one, equatorial climate. So, like I said, equatorial climate is experienced in areas which are along the equator. We have very well, if we were to have our map of Uganda, let me have it this way, that I will maybe give you all these climatic regions. So, here we say that we have got the line that is the equator. We draw it passing here like this. That is our latitude, 0 degrees, which is the equator. So we have our equator here. That is marked 0 degrees. Now, areas which are along the equator are the ones that experience equatorial climate. So if here, remember here we shall be having a lake here, that is Lake Victoria. So we shall be having that equatorial climate in these areas here, along the equator. And then we talked of the semi-desert climate. We say this one is experienced in areas that are semi-desert. And I said for us, we have these areas here which are semi-desert. I'm representing this area using letter S. So that can be for the equatorial, semi-desert climate. And we say the tropical, the mountain climate is experienced in areas which have got mountains. We have Mountain Elgon here, which means mountain is here, which means around this mountain we shall be having that type of climate. We have Mountain Rwenzori here, meaning around this Mountain Rwenzori we have that type of climate. We have Mountain Mfumbiro around here, which means around this mountain we shall be having that type of climate, like that. So that is what we call mountain climate. And then we have that tropical climate that we are saying that this one now covers the rest of Uganda, and we say it's the one which covers most parts of Uganda. So like we have said, this one is experienced in areas which lie along the equator, and you will find that areas which are along the equator always experience direct sunlight. And that's why you are going to be having a question disturbing us, that why are those areas ever hot? So you will find that these areas, that the sun shines, if this is the line 0 degrees, that is equator, you will find that the sun shines directly to this line of the equator. And because of the sun hitting this line, these areas are ever hot. And now, because of that hotness, you will find that as the sun hits these places, there are processes that are going to take place. One, if these areas have got like water bodies, the sun is going to heat up the water body, evaporation takes place, and convection rainfall will be formed. If the area has got like vegetation that is thick forests, it means that the sun hits the vegetation, the forests, they lose the excess water through the leaves, that is in a process that we call transpiration, and eventually still convection rainfall will be formed. So we are going to say that this type of climate is described as hot. It's described as hot and wet. Throughout. When we are writing throughout, we first write the word through, then we add out as one word. Throughout the year. So this is how we describe equatorial climate. In case you are asked, how do you describe equatorial climate? You say equatorial climate is the type of climate which is hot and wet throughout the year. I have explained hot and wet. The sun hits the place receives direct heat or direct sunlight, and because of that, evaporation takes place, transpiration takes place, and the place receives rain, so it becomes wet. That's why we have hot and wet. And you'll find that these areas receive most of the rainfall in the afternoons. That is during afternoon hours. That's when they always experience heavy rains. That is in the equatorial in the equatorial climate. When we have the characteristics, as we have the characteristics on our page 65, one tells us that this is hot and wet, that we have already mentioned here. Then it receives rainfall throughout the year, meaning That's what we're explaining here. Hot and wet, meaning rain is there throughout the year, the sun is there throughout the year. It's hot, it receives rainfall throughout the year, and we are saying that that rainfall is what we call convectional rainfall. And we say that the rainfall is accompanied by lightning and thunder. That is, as those rains come in the afternoon. And then we have got, it receives high humidity and it experiences high temperatures. And why high temperatures? It's because the sun hits directly to that line of the equator that experiences this type of climate. Now, we also need to look at which crops can be grown in such a climate. Crops grown. I want you to add this. Yeah, it's there. It's on page 67. Crops grown in the equatorial climate. Here we shall be looking at crops that require a lot of rain. Remember, this place receives too much rainfall. So we look at crops that need a lot of rain. For example, we have there coffee. There we have tea, oil palm. We have other crops like bananas. We have sugarcane. These crops require a lot of water. That is, they grow in areas that receive a lot of rainfall. So they are the ones that are grown here. The other thing is, which economic activities can be done in this type of climate? Economic activities. I know very well that we defined economic activities in the downer classes 3 and 4. We say economic activities are the activities that people do to make money or to earn money. Now, in this equatorial climate, remember we have said the area receives a lot of rainfall, which means crop growing is very possible. Crop growing. And we have even written some of these crops that can be grown in that type of climate. And then these areas also have got water bodies that can support fishing. Then they can also be having thick forests supporting what we call lumbering. And because of the forests, we can have tourism. Not enough, we can also have some animals which can be hiding in those forests, which can be hunted for food. So for that case, hunting becomes another economic activity. Remember, people can hunt and they can take these animals to sell. And then we have beekeeping also done in the equatorial climate. Then we go to the other type, the second type, that is about the tropical climate. Tropical climate. Tropical climate, we said in the first place that this one covers the widest part of Uganda, as we saw in our map. Therefore, we shall be having the description saying this type of climate is hot and wet. That is how we describe this, hot and wet. Sometimes say hot and warm. I mean warm and wet, rather. Or we can simply say hot and wet, but we don't say throughout the year, because when we do that, then we shall be going back to the equatorial climate. So this type of climate that is tropical climate, is like we have said, it covers most parts of Uganda, and it's characterized by 2 seasons. That is the dry season, and we shall be having the wet season. That is for tropical climate. And then we also have this type of climate experiencing high temperatures, and it tells us that it receives moderate rainfall, and it has the drier seasons which are a little bit longer. And also we need to know that most of the rain during the tropical climate is received during the period that we call equinox. During the period that we call equinox. Of course, we need to note the meaning of equinox. Equinox simply means the time in the year, or the period in a year. Remember, time is period. Time in a year when the sun is overhead, or we can simply say when the sun overheads the equator. So that is what we can say. Equinox is the time in a year when the sun is overhead the equator. Mainly this one happens in the month of March, that is 21st March, and we have it also, that is on 23rd of September. These are the equinox dates. You can be asked, mention the date, write one or write the dates when the sun is overhead the equator, or when equator takes place. The equator takes place on 21st March and 23rd September. This makes equal days and equal nights, meaning the days and nights appear equal, and this is the time when this area will be experiencing high rainfall or a lot of rainfall. We have got also the activities that take place in this type of climate, economic activities. Now, these economic activities, we shall also be having activities like crop growing. Remember, the area receives also, it has the wet season, so we have crop growing. Animals can be reared, so let's write them, crop growing. We have animal rearing, or we can simply call it animal keeping. And then we have also tourism. We have beekeeping and others. But what we need to note is that when it comes to crops, we shall also be looking at crops that need moderate rain, crops that need moderate rainfall. Then we go to the semi-desert climate, that is our third that we are going to be looking at. So we have semi-desert climate, semi-desert climate. So like we say, semi-desert climate, we look at the type of climate that is experienced in areas which are like dry, they are like a semi-desert. And we say an example for us in Uganda, we have this experience in around the northeastern part of Uganda. So if we have our map of Uganda like this, you will find that this is the type of climate which is experienced in the northeastern part here. This is where we have the semi-desert climate. We call this northeastern part because if we are to draw our compass direction, you will find that this is north and this is east. Between north and east gives us this direction. So you can be asked very many questions in this. Which type of climate is experienced in the northeastern part of Uganda? You need to know which one is the northeastern part. And if you are able to tell, then you can tell that that is the semi-desert climate. Also note that we don't have a desert in Uganda yet, but if we had, then we would also be having desert climate. That will be the type of climate that is experienced in desert areas. But when we go to other classes, when we continue with our learning, we shall also come across those other countries that are having them, and we shall bring that one. But for now, we don't have it in Uganda. We only have that area which is semi-desert. Now, semi-desert areas are always described as hot and dry. That is what we need to understand. We describe them as hot and dry, and these areas receive very little rainfall. They receive very little rainfall, which means that the crops that can be grown here, are those that mature very fast. Here we don't have to grow crops that take long. For example, we shall be having crops like sorghum, crops like wheat, crops like millet. These are crops that can mature very fast and they are harvested. So they are the ones that can be grown in such areas. So we also need to go to another type, that is mountain climate. Mountain climate as our fourth one and the last one, mountain climate. And like I had already explained this, we say this is the type of climate which is experienced in areas that are having mountains, which means we also learned that mountains have an influence to the climate. They contribute towards the climate of an area. How? We say mountains help in rain formation. That helps to modify or to determine the climate which is in an area. So, if we were to illustrate, you would find that if, for example, we have got a mountain in an area, we are illustrating what we call relief rainfall that is experienced in mountainous areas. You will find that we shall be having the sun, of course, shining, and here you will find we can have a small water body here, and you will find that here we are going to have wind blowing across the mountain. The wind comes with the aim of crossing to the other side of the mountain, but because of this mountain standing, this wind is forced to rise up. It bends, it goes up. But before that, when this wind comes and it passes through this water body, it picks moisture. So this wind is now warm, at the same time it's having moisture. The wind is forced to go up, like I have said, and when it rises up, it loses the moisture into the atmosphere, forming the clouds that will eventually result into the formation of rain. I mean, it will lead to rain being received in this area. Then we also need to note that this very wind continues descending, but now as it's descending, it's now dry. So we can call this dry wind descending. Here it was warm and it was having moisture and it formed rain. Now, one thing we need to observe in this diagram is the rain is experienced on one side of this mountain only. That we call the windward side. Windward side. Then the other side of the mountain does not receive rain, and we call it the leeward side. That we can also call the rain shadow. The leeward side or rain shadow. Now, you can also be asked, why is this side not receiving rain? You will find that this side does not receive rain because it experiences or it receives dry winds. These winds are dry without any moisture. So, one side only is receiving rain. Now, if I asked you, which side of the mountain. Of course, when they ask you for the sides of the mountain, don't begin messing up that maybe side A, side B, side left side, right side. No. We have got two sides of the mountain. We have the windward side, and then we have the leeward side. I want you to get that. Sometimes we keep on messing up on these simple things. Now, which side is good for growing crops? When we look at this diagram, we have the windward side, we have the leeward side. Which side is suitable for crop growing? Obviously, we shall understand that the side which receives rain will be the one which is good for crop growing, of which it's called the windward side. So that will be the answer. Then if they ask you that which activity can be done on this side of the mountain, remember this drier area, still we can have crop growing, but through what we call irrigation. Through irrigation. Irrigation means supplying water, that is connecting water from a water body to a dry area in order to make crop farming possible in that land or in that area. So the side of a mountain which is suitable for irrigation farming will be this which does not receive rain, because you can't again irrigate crops in the area where they're already getting the water, that is the rain. That one will not be possible. So that helps us also to understand that. So having looked at these types of climate that we have also called the climatic conditions, we are also going to look at what we call the factors that determine the climate of an area. We are looking at which factors influence the climate of an area. That is what we are moving to understand now. So we have the factors that affect. We can also say factors that influence the climate of an area. So we are looking at which things can determine the climate which is in an area. We have factors like, we have what we call altitude. Altitude. We have the presence of water bodies in an area. You can say distance of that place from the water bodies. Then we have the distance of a place from the equator. We saw how the equator influences the type of climate in an area. We said areas which are near the equator receive direct sunlight, which enables transpiration and evaporation to take place, and eventually rain is formed. So we say distance of a place. Distance of a place from the equator. The distance of a place from the equator is what we simply term as latitude. We call it latitude, not latitudes, but latitude. And then we also have the vegetation of an area. We shall be looking at how each factor determines the climate. Vegetation of an area. We have human activities also affecting climate. Time will come when we shall be talking about this one by one. And then we have got relief. That is the general appearance of an area can also affect the climate of an area. And then we shall also be having others like wind. This is what we call prevailing wind. Prevailing winds. We shall be looking at how winds can bring can determine the climate of an area. Now, if we were to explain this one by one, beginning with the first one, we have got what we call altitude. By definition, we say altitude is the height of land above the sea level, which means we are looking at the height of land above the sea level. The sea level is always here at 0 meters, because we measure the sea level, the height in meters or feet. So we need to note that when we look at areas, those areas which are on a lower altitude tend to be hotter compared to those which are on a higher altitude, which are cooler. That is why we always say that the higher you go, the cooler it becomes, meaning that areas which are up this way are cooler. These ones are cooler, whereas the areas which are down here are hotter. So you can be asked questions comparing places, comparing districts, comparing countries, comparing sub-counties, whatever. They can ask you a question like, why is Kampala cooler than Gulu? That is a question. Why is Kampala cooler than Gulu? So when you get such a question comparing places, you know that is because of this factor that is called altitude. It makes some places to be having high temperatures while others to be having low temperatures. And the ones with lower temperatures become cooler. The ones with higher temperatures become hotter because of what you call altitude. So how do you answer this question? Which place is cooler? The place which is on a higher altitude. So you simply say Kampala is on a higher altitude than Gulu. Remember to always talk about the two places which are asked, because the question is comparing them. Don't only say Kampala is cooler, or you say Kampala is cool. You have not mentioned about Gulu, and you will not be given a mark. So you need to talk about both places. If a question can be asked, why is Entebbe cooler than like Soroti? You can still say, you will still go by this factor of altitude. You ask yourself, the one which is cooler, it means the one which is on a higher altitude. So you can get your answer saying Entebbe is cooler, Entebbe is on a higher altitude than Soroti. Only just note that the higher you go, the cooler it becomes. Areas on a higher altitude are cooler than those on a lower altitude. That is about altitude. We go to water bodies. How do water bodies influence the climate of an area? Of course, here we still need to understand that when we are talking of water bodies, we take an example, an area has got a water body like a lake. A lake is here in an area. So what happens? We have the sun shining, and this sun is going to heat up the water body. These are the sun rays heating up the water body. So because of this continuous heating of this water body is going to evaporate. This water is going to escape into the atmosphere in the process that we call evaporation. So we have evaporation process. Evaporation takes place. And when this water vapor goes into the atmosphere, it's going to condense. That is forming the process we call condensation. That will eventually lead into rainfall being received in an area, of which this will help to modify the climate of an area. So we have understood that having water bodies or the presence of a water body in an area can affect or influence the climate of an area. Then we have distance of a place from the equator. That we already said that areas which are along the equator receive direct sunlight, of which still they will help in the formation of rain through either transpiration or evaporation. And we have what we call the vegetation of an area. Now, with vegetation, of course, we also need to look at this very kind of a diagram, in that the difference is we shall be having now vegetation here. So how does vegetation affect or influence the climate of an area? If we have a vegetation, for example, we have a forest in an area, what happens is the sun hits these trees, and these trees will lose water through the leaves, that is, through the help of the stomata. And this process is the one that we shall be calling transpiration. Transpiration, of which water vapor will again be condensed in the atmosphere to form clouds. That is in the process stage that we call condensation, and the end result will be rain being received in that area. So that is how the presence of vegetation in an area can affect or influence the climate of an area. Next, we have human activities. How do human activities affect the climate? Now, we need to note that human activities simply refer to the activities that people do in the environment where they live. And these activities at the end tend to become positive or negative. What I mean is, the positive human activities are the ones that will lead to, that can modify the climate of an area. Whereas the negative human activities can spoil the climate. They can affect the climate in a bad way. Now, here we would give examples like agroforestry as a positive human activity. You will find that that is when people grow crops in areas where they do not exist. Or reforestation, that is growing trees or planting trees in area where trees were cut down. So all those activities, you will find that they will make the environment to be good, of which the trees, of course, the trees grown will help in rain formation, that will help to modify. Then we also have other activities like agroforestry, and then we have what we call bush fallowing as a positive human activity. The other ones, the negative human activities that can spoil the climate, include deforestation, overgrazing, bush burning, overlumbering, overstocking, and very many others. You'll find such activities will lead to the destruction of the vegetation that would help to modify the climate. So at the end of it all, we shall find that human activities contribute to the climate in an area. They can affect the climate either positively, that is in the case those human activities are good, or making the environment poor, that is negatively, in the case they are negative human activities. Then we have, lastly, we have the wind movement. This one, we shall be looking at it when we come to the upper classes. So for that, we shall have understood how the different climatic factors influence or affect the climate of an area. So, dear viewer, for now, we are ending our lesson there. I want to thank you so much for being part of this lesson, and may God bless you.